Hello friends, I'm so excited for this one. I hope you're as excited as I am, because today's going to be a really fun and special one. Now, this tutorial is going to be split up into 3 parts, because if it wasn't, this video might take 3 hours and I just might change careers. The first part is the basic mechanics. We learn how to make this. The second part is the advanced mechanics, where we add stuff like sprinting, leaning, and so on. And finally, the third part is where we really start to add the feel, like adding momentum, adding visual effects, adding camera visual effects, all the fun stuff. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, as usual, I like to set the stage before I begin any scripting. In replicate storage, we're going to add 4 folders. And the first folder is going to be a mystery folder, a bonus for the end, wink wink. The second folder is going to be where we store all our modules, then where we store all our meshes, and finally where we store all our remotes. I know there's technically only going to be one thing in each of these folders, and we might technically not need folders, but it's good to stay organized and build the habit for when you make more complicated projects. So in remotes, we're just going to add a remote event. It's just going to help us communicate between the server and client boundary. You can call it anything. I'll call it Broomstick Remote because my naming skills are top notch. In modules, this isn't necessary, but I highly recommend it. FenMod. It just makes life so much easier as a skill developer. Link in the description, of course. And then in ServerScript service, we'll add our meshes later. In ServerScript service, we add a script. This just handles everything Broomstick server related. So the actual movement of our player and so on. And then in starter pack, we add a local script, which is same thing, but Broomstick, like, it handles everything local for our Broomstick, client-sided. And now we're done. Your workspace should look a little something like this. Now in the local script, let's begin. First things first, let's get some variables we're going to be needing. The first one we're going to need, of course, is fan mode. And to get fan mode, we'll get replicated storage. Perfect. Now we want to get when a key is pressed, any key, let's say E. So that'll be the keybind for our skill. So when E is pressed, we want to know when it's pressed. Lucky for us, fan mode comes in with the clutch, and we can easily do this by going fan mode, the keybind. And the first parameter is the key you want. It can be in single or double quotations. Single looks really nice for me. Second is the cooldown. It can be any number, 102 seconds, 1 billion seconds. But if you put nil, it's just gonna be 0.1 seconds. And the final parameter is the function. What is gonna happen when E is pressed by the player? So let's go ahead and test this to make sure it works. Wow, never mind. E pressed. I press E. It shows it. I press it again. I'm spamming it. Works perfectly. And of course, if for some reason or another you can't use fan mode, your PC's like in its dying bed and it can't take another plugin, another anything, you can just instead get user input service and then copy this out. And then you just continue on from here. Why use fan mode? It just allows us to focus on what's really important instead of stuff like user input service. But of course, if you are still a beginner and you don't quite understand like stuff like user input service, I recommend that you type it out fully and really get to know it. It's really beneficial. Now, because we're going to be using user input service later in the video, I'm just going to leave it there. Next thing we want to do is to basically activate and deactivate the skill, right? We want to know when it's activated, when it's deactivated, because it's not like a single press skill. It's you press E to activate it, press E again to deactivate, then if it's deactivated, you press E again. Now, let's get a variable local broomstick activated equals false. Now we could go, if broomstick activated equals false, then broomstick activated equals true, else broomstick activated equals false. Yeah, that we could do that. Or instead, we can take advantage of booleans and go broomstick activated equals not broomstick activated. So this is just the same thing as what I just typed. So if it's false or nil, then it becomes true. If it's true, then it becomes false. And if we were to print broomstick activated, you see we've achieved our goal. Now when I activate the ability, when I press E the first time, it should say true. When I press it again, it should say false. True, false, true, false. Beautiful. Now we've activated and deactivated the skill. The second thing we're gonna do in the local script is force shift lock. So forcing our player into shift lock like so, to really make controlling the broomstick a lot easier and a lot more fluent almost. How do we do this? How do we force our player into shift lock? Is it like a player property, a function that we can use that just says force player into shift lock? Well, unfortunately, after doing a lot of digging, trust me, I really wanted to find this, I could not find anything on forcing the player into shift lock with one line of code. So how do we do it then if we can't just force them into shift lock? Easy. Everything's an illusion. So we create our own shift lock. Sounds easy enough. But to create our own shift lock, we must first understand what shift lock is, what it does to our player. So I activate shift lock. And first thing I notice is my mouse is in the center of my screen. That's number one. And as I move left and right, so does my camera. The second thing I notice is my player always faces towards my mouse, no matter what direction I'm moving in. And the third thing I notice is a cursor appears right above my player's shoulder. So let's go from top to bottom. Now I create the variable outside of this FenMod keybind, so it makes me a tad bit uncomfortable to create a new function every time we press E, so I'm just setting it to this so it's only one function. And then the first parameter, this just tells us if we should force our player into shift lock or not. Now like I said, the first thing was our mouse was in the center of our screen. So how do we do that? Lucky for us, it's very simple. If we should activate force shift lock, then there's a property in user input service called mouse behavior, and it essentially allows us to lock our mouse at the center of our screen. Now I could go else, then deactivate, but I find this looks a lot more sleek. Return if it's true, and then everything else here just means deactivate shift lock. So first things first, we've already locked it to center. Now the shift lock's deactivating. Copy this, put it here, and set it back to default. Let's test. So I activate the skill. Nothing happens. Oh, that's because I haven't called force shift lock. My bad. So now I call force shift lock with broomstick activated. So if the broomstick is activated and forces into shift lock, if not, then don't force us into shift lock, then unforce us from shift lock. I activate the skill, and would you look at that, our mouse is stuck at the center of our screen, and as I move from left to right, so does our camera. That's the first objective acquired. Time for the second one. The second one's a little more challenging than one line of code, but it's still pretty easy to make our player look where our mouse is facing. Now we can achieve this by using align orientation, and you already know I got you guys. There's a function for Fed mode called align orientation. The first parameter is the part we want to be affected by this constraint. So our humanoid root part, let's go get that. And of course, where we want to look at the mouse's position. So let's also get the mouse. Perfect. Now, if we were to put humanoid root part and then to look at the mouse that hit the position, which is just the mouse's position in 3D space, it would make us look in the direction we activated the ability at and not our current direction. So let's test and so you can see what I mean. Let's say I'm facing towards that part. Perfect. But if I were to rotate, it doesn't come with me. So how can we fix this? Well, we can update the position we want to look at with a loop. So I create a spawn function, so it just skips over it and it doesn't get stuck at the loop. Then repeat. And we want to repeat this loop until the skill is deactivated. And then everything else here means the skill is deactivated. And here we can just update the align orientation C frame by going cframe.new. The first parameter is the position of the original part. And the second parameter is where we want that original part to look at. Now we can set here to nil. Perfect. But if you notice something, this whole thing fires no matter if the ability is activated or not. So if it's activated, we create an align orientation and we create a loop. If it's deactivated, we create an align orientation and we create a loop. So instead, let's make it only fire if broomstick activated. No. If broomstick activated is true. So we just return end if it's not true. So if it's deactivating. And why we do that is because we already have something here to handle the deactivation. So it just saves lines of codes and make it more optimized. And by the way guys, I'm not just like spitting this out like first try. It took literal weeks of optimization to get it to this level. So be gentle with yourself. And after the broomstick is deactivated, we can go ahead and just destroy the align orientation. Let's test this. Ooh, I make this mistake every time. If you're wondering what just happened, I just crashed. And the reason I just crashed was because I forgot to add a wait to this loop, so it just ran infinitely in the span of an infinitely small amount of time. So I activate the skill, and would you look at that, we are looking at where we want to. But when I deactivate the skill, my mouse is still stuck at the center of my screen. And the reason my mouse is still stuck at the center of my screen is because this function only fires when it's true, because everything down here only fires when it's true, so this only returns true. So instead, we can just manually set this by going activate for shift lock right here, and then deactivate it when the skill is over. So let's test again. Perfect. And I deactivate the skill and everything works fine. Ooh, I almost forgot one thing. For those who aren't using fan mode, don't worry, I got you guys. This is what you would want to copy down. For for the align orientation. Now fan mode is designed with a feature that automatically destroys the attachment for constraints. So down here you'd also want to destroy this attachment. Okay, let's continue. Now we're done that, the final thing is to create a cursor. Wait, before that, if you're as annoyed with the mouse icon as I am with it, we can easily set it to invisible by going user input service, the mouse icon enabled equals. So if it's true, we can see the icon. If it's false, we can't. So not force shift lock, because if force shift lock is activated, we don't want to be able to see the icon. So let's begin. Let's test it. The icon is gone, and we see. Now, if some of you are satisfied with what we have, I suggest you skip to this time frame. But for some of you, for the rest of you who are like me, who are like, bro, what about the icon? Get ready, because the icon would be the hardest thing we do in this local script. And you see just why. So let's begin if you're ready.